Okay, so hello, Stuart Coleman, introducing you from ODI. It's Tasia from We Are HR, and we're going to be discussing leadership today with Stuart. He's got some really interesting views and some ideas around leadership, and he'll be talking about his experience and also demonstrating some good advice in what makes a good leader, and drawing on his own experiences, through his advice. Perfect. Thank you, Stuart. Hi.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks for having me today. Delighted to have this conversation and looking forward to some of the debate we're going to have and hopefully provide some insights.
Mm-hmm. So, Stuart, thinking about leadership and your current career today, you're working at ODI and you also have your own company as well. So you're also leading that as well. Gosh. How have you adapted your leadership style to the various environments that you currently work in?
It's a good question. So just for your listeners, the ODI is the Open Data Institute. It's a 10-year-old not-for-profit that works at the intersection of government, public sector and international audiences. We're not a massive organization, about 60 people, 10 million turnover. We generate income equally from those three areas. So we have quite kind of a wide range of customers to deal with different cultures and experiences. My role here is one of the leadership team. I'm a director, so I have some leadership responsibilities as well as some management responsibilities. And I guess you talked about me having my own business. I've had that for 8 or 9 years. At one point, it was quite big, turning over north of £1 million. Suffered quite a lot in the pandemic. I think incorporating my own business taught me the difference between managing and leading. And I went through a journey on that. That business I still run with a massively reduced workforce and turns over several hundred K now. And the ODI is kind enough to let me run that outside of the work I do here. I suppose I've, in 25 years of being employed or being a company director or company founder, are constantly learning about what leadership is. I mean, you, through kindly inviting me to have this conversation, made me reflect a bit on that and go away and look at formal definitions of leadership and actually looking at some of the theories and some of the academic kind of approaches behind that made me think, what kind of a leader am I? And if I'm really honest, I think my leadership style has evolved over time and has adapted to suit the contexts I've worked in. If I reflect to my first management role, which had some elements of leadership in it, and again, going back to the point a minute ago, it was quite a transactional leadership role. I was there to, in the early years, run a sales and marketing team and deliver numbers and drive simple bookings and revenue outcomes from a range of transactions. And yes, had some input to the overall leadership vision for the organization, but was effectively a smaller cog in a bigger machine. Whereas, if I look at some of the work I do now, there's an element of what I think some theorists describe as kind of almost like servant style leadership. I'm quite often there to implement the will of founders behind a mission-driven organization like the ODI. We have Ernest Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, and Professor Sir Nigel Shadbolt, who's a kind of eminent AI academic, and they have a particular vision about what we're trying to achieve, and I have to try and put that into practice in an operational leadership style. And so sometimes I kind of veer between serving them and sometimes having to be a bit autocratic about leadership, saying, well, how are we going to do it? And another style that came out as a kind of prescriptive style of leadership. And these are somewhat negative sounding, perhaps in part, but I think, I suppose I've observed and demonstrated different approaches to leadership in different cultural environments. The challenging thing about the ODI is that when you engage with all those different types of customers, they have different expectations around how they want to be worked with, and that can be challenging for our team.
Yeah. So I totally agree. There's so many different leadership styles that you can adopt within an organization, and it often does depend on the type of organization that you work within, and the type of people that you work within. So there's quite a few reasons why you may adapt your style to suit the people that you're working within and to suit the organization type that you work for. And, you know, I've worked for quite a autocratic organization, which is bureaucratic, and it was actually a council. And I remember the leadership style there was very directive. It was almost, this is the work you need to do, and you need to get it done. And the leaders there were overseeing that you were getting what you should get done. There wasn't anything about thinking outside the box, how better to do things, and that leadership style didn't exist where they're getting you to think outside the box and be creative. And I do feel that now we're living in this environment where it's constantly changing and organizations can't be standing still anymore. We're expecting leaders also to adopt this attitude of looking at more creativity from their staff, or trying to get their staff to be more creative. So I think the leadership styles have definitely changed over the years, and have changed according to the business environment as well.
I mean, I think that that's a really, you talk about the changes over time. I would agree with that. I think that if you look at some of the, I don't know, the big tech firms, I mean, we at the Open Data Institute often kind of raise our eyebrows about how they're working with data, in terms of they have huge control and almost monopoly style control over huge flows of data. But if you look at their workplace cultures inside those organizations, I mean, they do lead in a different way. They allow, there's a bit more of the laissez-faire style of leadership in some of what they do, that they afford staff and employees. For example, I don't know if they still have it, but Google used to have something called the 20% time, where, you know, if you were in a particular, I think it was either across every role, or it might have just been in certain areas of research, but there was a particular focus where you could have 20% of your time for your own projects, doing your own things. You would never have got that in, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago in a traditional technology company. They just wouldn't have afforded you, because everything, there would have been too much focus on, there would have been, much more focus on kind of bean counting about someone's time. You know, there would have never been support for. So I think generally leadership styles have become more democratic, and I think the push towards a more diverse, equitable, inclusive workforce is good, and that's supporting that. And it's something we're trying to push as an agenda here at the ODI. It can be challenging when you're a relatively small organization. 60 people is a SME, but no, I agree with you. I think that's a good thing. I think that's advancing the leadership agenda.
And you know what I've noticed as well? I've noticed that in organizations that are smaller, the SMEs that I work with, they tend to have this ability to motivate and encourage employees to think outside the box. And I think this type of leadership is necessary for organizations that are looking to constantly be improving, because you get the younger generation coming in with ideas of how things could be done, things could be improved. And you need the older generation, these leaders, to listen and take on board some of these ideas, rather than hold them accountable to producing, tasks and things from their job description example that they probably haven't completed yet. But listen to some of these ideas, let them think outside the box, and let them be creative, because that's what's going to drive the organization forward. So
no, I mean, that's actually, I mean, for us, that's a very important area, because we need, for us, that what I'd call the kind of pipeline of young talent that we have coming into the organization, but often flowing through it. So we have quite a few relationships with things like universities, and we do research fellows, and there's policy fellows. We have people coming in for project-based work. We need that throughput of thinking and energy, because it kind of motivates the core team as well. At the same time, we need some of the, if you like, the more seasoned, experienced, I don't know, and we're not necessarily expecting some of the senior leaders to have vision, but we're making sure that they have oversight of how we run as an organization is as important, to make sure we manage whether it's our finances, whether it's our governance and processes. We have quite a lot for an organization of our size, because that stuff's important, because we do, we're not here to pay returns to dividends to shareholders. We're here to prove that we've had impact because of our mission. So yeah, I mean, I think leadership for us is, we are going through a bit of a transformation. We're pivoting from reducing the kind of 20% funding we get from government over the next 3 years to becoming completely self-funded. So losing 25% of that funding over time. That's creating a bit of a cultural change for us. And we're having to inject some areas of kind of autocratic leadership to just try to get a bit of focus on some areas, at the same time as not extinguishing what you just described, which is that throughput of energy and ideas, and we value and welcome that. And yeah, I mean, I think hope staff would back me up and say that we're a pretty democratic organisation in the way we.
Yeah, I'm sure they will, Stuart. I've worked with you, and you are democratic. You're democratic to the extent that it's so hard to make decisions because everybody has a point of view, which is nice. It's nice. It's nice that you allow employees to, provide guidance and provide advice and, give some views on how they want things to be done in the organisation, which is good. And that is really democratic. But then on the other side, it's really difficult to roam that in and make decisions, basically. Yeah.
And actually I'm getting a steer to be quite openly to be more assertive in that area, as for example we're about to embark on something that's commercial to support the purpose and the aims of the not-for-profit, and that's a new thing for us to be doing, to without going into too much detail. I have to demonstrate a slightly different leadership style with that initiative, otherwise it's not going to be successful. And so it's almost like I'm having to be a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde, because I wear like one kind of leadership style with the core institute and then another with the other organization. So that's a good test for me.
That is a good test, because then you're going to have to really understand the characters of the people that you're leading. Like how you adjust
the teams
yourself for these.
So I can get quite close to the people.
Perfect, and that's a good focus for good leaders. Leaders should understand the people that they're leading. What ticks their box? What lights their fire? How can you get them to do what you really want them to do in a way that's not autocratic and forceful, but is in a way that they are thinking that they could get into this decision themselves, which is not easy. Which is really, I find, extremely tricky. So moving on, you've given some advice and some guidance about what you're currently doing in ODI. What's your view on what makes a good leader, Stuart? What makes a good leader?
Well, I did a bit of thinking about this, and like everyone with a web browser and search engine, a bit of the searching, and I kind of thought, well, I think that the answer to that question, a bit like your earlier comment, has changed over the last 25 years a lot, because technology, I mean, we're having this kind of virtual conversation now, has enabled people that perhaps wouldn't have been traditionally seen as leaders to come to the fore. Whether it's activist leaders like, I don't know, Greta Thunberg, who would never, as someone perhaps with, I think, mild Asperger's and an open fear of being in large groups of people, which unfortunately for her has been essential for her to drive forward her the agenda around climate. She has been able to be a leader, and I think that's an interesting. So the answer to your question is, I don't think there's a set recipe. Well, if there is a set recipe, it's someone who is authentic in their style. So in the case of Greta Thunberg, she's very clear and open about who she is, and some people buy into that, some people don't, but it's had impact, and she's had impact in a way that has not been possible before. I mean, when I was looking into this, I came across an interesting article on unsung heroes, people that inventors of people that did things that changed the world. Our own Tim Berners-Lee's one person. I mean, he's accused of inventing the internet. He did not invent the internet. The internet's effectively a collection of many inventions. He invented the web. But that is probably one of the most impactful inventions in making the internet work the way we know it. But there was I think it's Niels Hogan who invented the seatbelt. I mean, some of these people, these are, is someone a leader because they're an inventor? Well, if they do something different that is authentic and they follow through on it and it drives massive change, then yes, arguably they are a leader. I think it's someone who's, to me, the authenticity thing was a big one. I think with people, when I've really responded well to good leadership, it's where I don't always agree with someone, but I respect the way they behave as a leader because they're consistent, they're true to their what they communicate as their purpose and their goals, and they don't deviate from that. So it's not to say they wouldn't engage and listen and have some democratic approach in their leadership style. It's just that they would remain true to the purpose they're representing. So yeah, I think authenticity is really important to be a leader. Like, you can't be. I mean, I actually had a session with ODI's kind enough to pay for some coaching for me, and I had a session with my coach this morning, and he was encouraging me to say, look, just stop worrying about what other people think so much. Just make it clear to them what your leadership style is, and have a think about. He was saying kind of come up with 4 or 5 words, and you don't put me on the spot, please, around what your leadership style is. And that was actually really hard. I could come up with 2. And I was struggling with those ones. So I think it's important to think about that as a leader. Being
and
egocentric.
it's not easy. It's not easy to say what really makes a good leader. But one of the things that I've noticed in quite a few leaderships qualities that I've observed is that leaders tend to always think outside the box and tend to have quite a few followers. They tend to have people that are following them. So it could be this cause, like you mentioned, a cause, that everyone is true to it and being authentic and feeling that this is what they want to do and what's driving this leader is this cause. And then they have followers from this. But then also what also makes a good leader is, somebody that takes control, somebody that is able to get others on board and to also get others to think outside the box and to also to think, about making improvements, about doing things better.
Yeah, I think there's a motivational element to it, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, you've got. So again, my coach was providing quite interesting context. He was formerly the CEO of a 100,000 people business, so a completely different scale to the ones that I've predominantly worked in. I mean, most people I've ever managed would be about, I don't know, 150 indirectly. Completely different scale for him. He contrasted himself versus another leader in the executive team of the business he was in as he was the kind of a leader through process and rigor, whereas the other leader was a leader through motivation and charisma and kind of had people. I think if you have your own authentic leadership style, it's important that you, as a leader, surround yourself with people who fill in the gaps that you don't have that are needed for the type of organization you're running or for the type of goals that you've been set in your leadership role. I mean, I've been set 2 to 3 year kind of goals of things I need to achieve here, and I'm pretty clear on where I've got shortcomings around things I can't manage so well, or I don't feel I'm best placed to lead on, so I'm delegated to other people as much as I can, I suppose. It's a good point that you make. I mean, I think inspiring other people to think and take action is probably one of the most important things that every leader should try and have.
Yeah. So, last question: advice that you'd give in terms of leadership. Any leadership advice that you can give to other aspiring leaders out there? What advice can you give? I'm an aspiring leader, and I would like to start leading. I'm not a born leader. I don't think I'm a born leader, but I think I can develop into a leadership. So what advice can you give me?
Well, I don't think anyone's a born leader. That would be the first thing. So I think clear your mind of that misconception. Find out what your authentic leadership style is. Maybe look up some of the styles and consider the context you're working in, and then look around you at other leaders. I don't think you should idolize anyone else, but figure out what the style is that you need to be effective to achieve the things that your employer, your own business, whatever the environment you're in is, make you effective and fulfilled. I mean, it's like there's no point in developing yourself into a style that doesn't feel natural. That's the authenticity bit. I think, you know, when my coach asked me this question this morning, like, what are the 5 traits you would say define your leadership style? I had 3, and then I was kind of thinking, well, the other 2 I'd want a kind of aspirational. If I'm honest, I'm probably not very good at those things. So work on those. And the only way you can improve is by learning, and the only way you can learn is by listening.
By listening and listening and doing and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes.
Exactly. And I'm always learning, and I've made some mistakes. My own business nearly went down the pan, but I managed to just about keep it going. Yeah, but I mean, it's part of the journey, isn't it? So I think develop your own authentic style. Don't rid yourself of any misconception that I'm an introvert and I've never managed, or it's not about managing leadership. It's not about managing the two. Make sure it took me a while to learn that, probably too long actually.
They're two very different.
Exactly. And it took me a real while to understand that.
Yeah.
So and just become authentic and work out what your style is and be proud of it. And tell people what it is actually. I think if you tell people what your style is and how you're used to working as a leader, then they're clear on how to engage with you.
Yeah. It's funny because it took me years to really separate leadership and management. It really did. And now that I have my own business, I'm like, oh God, I'm not a good manager. I hate overseeing, checking up constantly. It annoys me. But I love being inspirational. I love giving lots of ideas, views, and getting people to follow and getting them to think outside the box and getting them to think about doing things differently.
Have you got anyone that can help you do the
management stuff? Oh yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yeah, I've got somebody there, but I need to upskill her a bit more in how to manage, because I know how to manage, but I don't like doing it. So I need to upskill her. So I'm thinking about putting her on a management training program so she develops this understanding of how to manage and what systems need to be in place for her to manage. But the leadership, I love leading. I love bouncing ideas from the team, getting everyone to think about, goals in which we can try to move in this direction with the company, things that we haven't thought about. I love this. I really enjoy this. And everyone said, you're really inspirational because you've got so many ideas. But, it's not easy to differentiate both. And some people find it hard, but I've never found this hard. I've always known there was 2 different leadership and management, totally different. But it's understanding this and then really being true to yourself and understanding, your areas of strengths and your areas of weaknesses, really, and what your development areas are. And sometimes you don't want to be honest with yourself because you're in denial and you think that you can do this. But, sometimes it hits home and you have to just accept when you make the mistakes because of this, lack of understanding that you have. So Stuart, on the end note, you were talking about those the advice, the leadership advice, and you kept to mention that your coach, and I'm really intrigued to see, what those areas of advice would be. I really am. The words that make a good leader, and you said you couldn't sum it up in words, but said that you found 3.
He's asked me to define my leadership style by listing out the kind of the characteristics I would want people to say about me if I wasn't in the room. That's kind of the exam question, is think about what you would want people to say about you, but be authentic. Don't try to be something you're not. So he knew when he was working in parallel to this other leader, he wasn't trying to compete with them. He was trying to be his authentic brand. And I think that was, to me, very good advice. So you come up with what your authentic leadership style is and try to list that out in adjectives that people would use to describe you if you weren't in the room. And then think about how some of those, maybe if it was a handful of adjectives, what 2 of them might be that you think you need to develop, because you've got certain approaches and behavioral characteristics that you're uniquely strong in. Play to those, play to your strengths, at the same time as figure out how to mitigate things you're not good at, and develop things that you could be better at because you have a appropriate bias towards. I mean, that's a long-winded answer to say play to your strengths, be aware of your weaknesses, and build empathy and listen to others, and you'll learn. And I think that everyone should have their own style.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Play to your strengths, build empathy, listen and learn. I think that's really, really good advice. To be honest, you could take that advice even if you weren't the leader, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess so.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Stuart. It was so nice having you today. Really enjoyed that conversation. I hope others listen to this podcast and take on board some of the advice. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks.
Thanks, Natasha.
Bye-bye.
Bye.